Fuerte aplauso para recibir a Don. Por cierto, aclarar que Don es un hombre de muchísimos talentos, pero hablar español creo que no es uno de ellos. Así que lo vamos a tener que hacer en inglés. So, bienvenido. Welcome.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
No, it's our pleasure that you're here with us. Maybe we can start going back to those early days of Morningstar, 40 years ago. I'm just curious to understand what really attracted you to work for what in effect was a startup at the time.
Well, working at Morningstar was exactly what I wanted to do, even though Morningstar didn't exist. I had started investing in mutual funds when I was 13 years old. My father bought me 100 shares of the Templeton Growth Fund. And he sat me down and he showed me, this is the portfolio of the fund. And you now own a little bit of each of these different companies. And there's this person, Sir John Templeton, who's the money manager, who is your personal portfolio manager. He's running your money. And I thought that was just amazing. You know, I was this 13-year-old kid in Dallas, Texas, easily the least important investor on the face of the planet. And yet Sir John Templeton was managing my money. It was what was magic about mutual funds, you know, that you had these wonderful, skilled people that were putting together portfolios that the average investor could access. And I had friends in college that they would try to pick stocks. They'd say, "Oh yeah, my dad and I are playing the market, and we're buying this stock on Tuesday and this one on Wednesday." I'm like, how in the world are you going to win at that? How are you going to go up against the pros, just you and your dad? So it seemed to me that mutual funds had a bright future and that they were going to be more important, and it was the way that more people would take control of their financial futures. I studied economics and literature in school, and when I got out, what I wanted to do was get a job writing about and investing in mutual funds. I didn't know at that time there wasn't a career path, so fortunately Joe Mansueto created that career path. He ran an ad in the Chicago Tribune that said, "Wanted mutual fund writer." And so I came in and interviewed, and I said, "I want to be a mutual fund writer." And he hired me for the job, and other than marrying my wife, it was the best decision I ever made.
So throughout the life of Morningstar, I mean, we've experienced different, market environments, different ways of doing things, and Morningstar has stayed the course. What do you think is the secret for our success, actually?
I've been thinking about that a lot, given that it's the 40th anniversary, and you realize how few companies make it to 40 years. I mean, it really is an achievement. And one of the things I've been thinking about is that all companies have to define what they do, how they do, and why they do it. But all companies sort of pivot or gravitate more towards one of those things than the other. And Morningstar has always been, I think, a why company. In other words, if you hear our CEO talk, if you hear other people who've been at Morningstar for a long time, we talk about it as being a mission-driven company. And our mission is to empower investor success, to help small investors meet their goals. Because in this industry only does its best if investors do their best. And so, to me, that was the real key, is having a mission. And I saw recently what I would define as sort of a what company that was sold last year to another company. And if you'd asked this company, they were giants in the industry. They were one of the biggest mutual fund companies in America. And we were just in awe of them. They were super big. But if you asked them what they did, they said, well, what we do is we run actively managed mutual funds sold through brokers. They were a what company. And what happened to them, unfortunately, over the time is that the world pivoted on them. The world moved away from active management. It moved away from mutual funds towards ETFs and other things. And it moved away from brokers to more financial advisors and a completely different ethos. And they had a very hard time pivoting. But Morningstar, because we're a mission-driven company, it's easier to pivot. If you start off with the goal is simply to help investors reach their goals and to create better investor experiences, when you get a sea change, when things change, you tend to see it more as an opportunity. You say, what does this allow us to do now that we couldn't do before? And to me, that's the real key, is to go in and try to reinvent yourself, but always take new technologies and new ideas to do the job better than you could before. And I think that's why, because we're a mission-driven company, that I think we've been able to survive so far. Whether we'll meet the next set of challenges, I don't know, but I certainly
Well,
hope
I
so.
hope so. I hope so. We've been putting some photographs up here. May I just say you haven't changed a bit?
Yeah, right.
So moving 40 years forward and the present, and this is a topic that's been alluded to a couple of times already by other contributors, which is the issue of artificial intelligence and how that might actually be changing, whether for the good or for bad, the role of financial advisors. What's your take on it?
Well, I think it's hugely important. I think you've got to be exploring it and asking, how does this change things? In my mind, we've had, over the time that Morningstar's been around, 3 major evolutions in terms of technology. The first was the development of the personal computer. And Morningstar was started in 1984 because Joe Mansueto bought a personal computer in 1982, and he asked himself this essential question. He said, what can I do now that I couldn't do before? And he realized you could begin to assemble big databases, and you could manipulate them, and you could do interesting things with them, and you could do this at a fraction of the cost that it had been, say, a decade before. If Joe had tried to start the company in the 70s, he would have had to invest huge amounts of money in mainframe computers that would have been obsolete in just a couple of years. But instead, Morningstar was really a bet on the rise of the personal computer and the networking of personal computers. Then 20 years later, we had the rise of the internet, and a way for us to sort of reinvent our business and rethink about how we could better connect to people. And today, it's the same thing with artificial intelligence. And if you think back to the internet, remember all the people that would pontificate about how they're going to change the world? Very few people got those predictions right. There's no way in 1980 you could have told how the personal computer was going to change life dramatically, or how dramatically the internet would change things in 2000. And even today, you don't know exactly how artificial intelligence is going to play out. But what you do know is that you've got to be experimenting with this. You've got to be asking, what does this allow us to do now that we couldn't do before? And I think it's going to be hugely helpful for the asset management industry. Obviously, the asset management industry is under intense cost pressure. The threat from passive is a very important threat towards active. And artificial intelligence is one of the things that can drive costs down and can help perhaps level the playing field a bit. So I think we've all got to be rolling up our sleeves and asking, what can we do with artificial intelligence that we couldn't do before?
But so basically, it's going to be a help. I mean, I shouldn't feel threatened by Mo, right?
Well, I think it's going to be help, but there will be bad things that happen with artificial intelligence. I mean, there have been stories recently about people using artificial intelligence to mimic your loved one's voices, and you get a phone call, saying, "I desperately need money," and it sounds like your mother, or it sounds like your son. They're going to be bad players. Anytime there's a new technology, it takes a while for all of the safeguards to get into place. You don't know, the bad people are thinking about what they can do that they couldn't do before, as well as the good people. So it's not going to be just I don't want to be Pollyannish and just say this is just a wonderful thing, but it has the potential to be that, and I think we've got a responsibility to try to steer it in that way. So what you see here, this is Morningstar Mo. What's interesting about it is it has exclusively Morningstar content put into Mo. So every word I've ever written for Morningstar is now in Mo. So if you ask a question, what does Morningstar think about this, or what is happening in this topic, you're not going to get a lot of random things. You're not going to get some guy on the internet says this is good or this is bad. You're going to get considered opinion that's been filtered and edited and carefully thought out by our analysts over decades. And you can now access all of that in seconds. And I think that's essential. When I started at Morningstar, the challenge facing investors was, how do you get a hold of some good information so you could make an intelligent decision? Today, obviously, the challenge is, how do I make sense of an overload of information so that I can make a good decision? And artificial intelligence could be one of the ways that we harness that overload of information.
Very interesting, and so we should see Mo as a colleague, really. Okay.
Well, he's got the T-shirt already,
He's got
right?
the T-shirt, yeah. He's got the red Morningstar T-shirt, that's for sure. Another interesting topic. I mean, 2020. I think it was a month ago that actually in the U.S. the amount of money that is managed passively has actually overtaken the amount of money that is managed actively.
Yeah.
And I wonder whether we can share the, yeah, that's it. And actually in Europe, even though we're not at the same stage, I mean, the amount of money, passive is growing fairly healthily. In fact, I think in the last couple of years, there's been more outflows. There have been outflows of actively managed funds in Europe and inflows into passive strategies. And so I guess that just begs the question, is active management an endangered species?
Well, it won't go to zero anytime soon. It'll be around for a long time, and there'll always be a role for active. But it doesn't take a genius to figure out what's going to happen with these trends when you look at those things in motion. I don't think in the U.S. we'll see active ever pass passive again in our lifetimes. But to me, the important thing to realize about this is that active management is sort of failing so far, not because it's deteriorated. Active management is suffering because it's improved. It used to be, if you turn back the clock to 1980 when Morningstar was, just before Morningstar started, you had a lot of individual investors in the market picking their own stocks. And they would be notoriously bad investors. So you had this big pool that was systematically underperforming the market, which allowed all active managers to be above average. Well, those people, the individuals, aren't picking stocks anymore. They're buying funds. So right now, mutual fund managers, in effect, are the entire market. And the other thing is, if you go back to 1980, there used to be a huge discrepancy in the training and the capabilities and the resources that active managers had. You'd go to some places, like the big shops, and they'd have very sophisticated models and tools and research available to the portfolio managers. But there were a lot of smaller places that were running money that had very, very poor tools. And you just had basically a couple of guys and a desk and maybe a computer terminal, and that was it, to try to make their investment decisions. So you had a real range between quality managers and inferior managers. And that allowed a subset of the managers to regularly be above average. But that's changed completely. The asset management industry has become so professional, has become so sophisticated. Things like the Chartered Financial Analyst designation is a very high level of training that now is a prerequisite to be an asset manager. So the interesting thing today is that not only is everyone picking stocks professionally highly qualified to do it, but they've all been trained in the same essential fashion. They all have the CFA. They all look at the market the same way. They all use the same research, which makes their product more of a commodity. And that's one of the problems, that more and more of the funds look like the index. I mean, you have a very high correlation between active funds today with index than you did 50 years ago. And when you get things, when it's basically you're buying the same thing from different firms or from a passive, then it becomes, costs become more important and more of the differentiator. And that's one of the things that's favored passive investing. So it's the ultimate irony is that active is suffering because it's improved. But the good thing, I think, is that investors are winning. Because now you still have, as an investor today, you have access to tools that are more sophisticated than the top professional investors had a couple of decades ago, or even a decade ago. You've got the ability to access the remaining great active managers. You've got exchange-traded funds. You've got passive strategies. You've got a toolkit that is just has never existed before in history. So the question, though, is it's one thing to have the tools. It's another to know how to deploy them and to use them successfully. And that's the ongoing challenge for investors, and why advisors will continue to have a huge role in the investment success of individual investors.
Yeah, I mean, it's truly remarkable what's going on in the US. And now with the advent of active ETFs and how many sort of like traditional mutual fund companies are actually using the ETF wrapper to distribute their strategies, because, the ETF vehicle has become almost kind of like the default.
Well, active ETF is a really interesting thing, because one of the reasons that active managers have suffered is that the packaging of it, more and more distribution costs are included in the mutual fund, which pulls down the performance of active relative to passive. And if you think, who's the greatest active investor of our lifetimes? It's Warren Buffett. And you think, well, what would Berkshire Hathaway look like if it were a mutual fund? Well, it would have an expense ratio of about 1 basis point, and it would have perfect tax efficiency. It's never paid a dividend. It's never issued a capital gain. So that is the ideal packaging for active management. And unfortunately, where we've gone with retail funds, it's become less and less ideal, and it more scars some of the performance records. But with active ETFs, you'll almost certainly have lower cost, and you'll almost certainly have greater tax efficiency. So that may be one of the things that works to salvage active management and put it more on a level fighting field with passive.
Yeah, we shall see. Another interesting topic is ESG, and let's just be fairly not beat around the bush. I mean, the perceptions of ESG are very, very different depending on which side of the Atlantic you happen to be in. It's become fairly polarized in the United States. And I just wonder, why do you think that is, as an American citizen? What's going on with your fellow citizens?
Well, it's only polarizing when it became a political event. You get into politics, values are subjective, and people have different opinions and come at things differently, and the politician seize on that. But what's interesting to me is how much the asset management business in the U.S. has embraced ESG, and how many individual investors have embraced ESG. And it seems to me that sustainable investing or sustainability and investing really go hand in hand. When I had that first mutual fund managed by John Templeton, for a long time I thought of John Templeton as being my role model. And it only took me a couple of years to realize that, wait a minute, the real role model here was your dad. My dad was the role model. He was showing me that in saving and investing for the future to provide greater security and opportunities for our family was what a responsible adult did. We didn't always have the newest car on the block, we didn't have the biggest house on the block, but we would put money into mutual funds and we would save for the future. And that to me was the role model. That's what a responsible adult does. And I think of sustainability in the exact same sense. You could say, yeah, sure, I can live off, I can pollute, I can do things like this, I can do damage to the environment, and the next generation will foot the bill. But that's being the grasshopper, not the ant, and it's not having an investor mindset. So to me, sustainability and investing go together perfectly. The problem is now it's entered the political arena, and politicians tend, as you know, to be much more of the grasshopper school than the ant school, and that what they care about is winning the next election, and something that can rile people up and you can get votes in November, not thinking about what the things you do today, what they're going to do for society 10, 20 years from now. And that's the responsible act that you are seeing among a great deal of investors in the US, but you're not seeing among our politicians, sadly.
Yeah, well, talking about politics, I think, I'm going to find it very hard to let you go without actually bringing out your crystal ball and tell us who do you think is going to win the election? Not who do you want to win the election, who do you think is going to win the election?
Should that be phrased, who do you fear is going to win the election? I can't believe we're back at this point. I think most Americans, if you ask them, they'll say, I can't get enthusiastic about either candidate. And
but one will win.
I beg your pardon? One will win. And the sad thing is that we talk about it as being a U.S. election, but this election will come down to five states. Yeah. It doesn't matter how I vote. My vote will go to Biden because I live in Illinois, which is a blue state, a Democratic state. We always vote Democratic. California will vote for Biden. Texas will vote for Trump. These things are already given. And it just comes down, sadly, to 5 states. So it's what happens in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia, and Nevada. And nothing else matters. And what you really don't want to be is someone who lives in one of those states, because you are going to be bombarded with political ads over the next, because all of the budgets will go into targeting voters in those 5 states. Everyone else will see occasional ads, but those people their lives are going to be very uncomfortable for the next 6 months. But it's a sad thing. We talk about it as being a national election, but it really is just a handful of pockets that are going to swing this election.
Yeah. Oh, well, I mean, we'll be in tenterhooks and, come election night trying to see who's going to win. It's been really a pleasure, actually, to have you here. I think your wisdom, your knowledge. What is your next step in Morningstar, if I may ask?
Well, I work more in an advisory role at Morningstar. I think we've got great people in place, and as I travel and see the what we've created in different parts of the world, I'm just so touched. And again, I talked about we can't imagine what will happen in artificial intelligence. When we started Morningstar, there's no way I could have envisioned all of the things that this would grow into. But when I see our hardworking people and I see our great products, I just get so proud. And one of the things you realize in a company is it doesn't matter, any one person can only do so much, and it doesn't matter how much you do. What really matters is who you surround yourself with, and what kind of teams that you build. And are you creating the people that can carry on the legacy and take things to the next level? And I couldn't be more prouder of our teams that have done that, and the men and women that are working for us and helping to continue our mission to help investors meet their goals. Because again, if the investor wins, we all win.
Well, I think that's a fairly good message to wrap up the conversation. Thank you very much
Thank you.
Your
It's a pleasure.
here.